If you ever want to know where you stand in your family, wait until the will is read. I always believed I was a loved daughter. I worked hard, stayed quiet, did everything right. But I was just the extra child, the one they kept in the background. My parents left everything to my brother. And when I asked why, my mother texted me 2 words that ended everything: "We're done." That was the moment I realized blood doesn't always equal loyalty. My name is Marin Whitlock. I'm 29 years old, a nurse, and I've been paying my own way since I was 18. I never asked anyone for help. I worked through school, saved every dollar I could, and built my life brick by brick. Hard work came naturally to me. Love didn't, not in my house. Growing up, I always felt like I was standing in the shadow of my older brother, Colby. He was the golden child from the moment he was born, handsome, funny, the kind of kid teachers liked even when he barely tried. And he barely ever tried. Our parents, Judith and Raymond, praised him for everything. If he got a B, it was a celebration. If I got an A, it was expected. If he broke something, they laughed. If I made a mistake, I should have known better. That was the unspoken rule of my childhood. Colby was the favorite. I was the responsible one. Even as adults, nothing changed. Colby drifted from job to job, burned through money, and called home whenever life got hard. And my parents always picked up the phone. They bailed him out with a smile. They talked about him like he was some great success, even when he did nothing to earn it. Meanwhile, I built my own life quietly. I worked nights at the hospital, came home exhausted, and still called them to check in, hoping maybe they'd see my effort, maybe they'd say they were proud. They never did. But I kept trying. I didn't want to believe that love could be so uneven. Then my dad started having heart issues. It was the first time my parents talked about anything serious around me. They wanted to get family matters organized. I didn't think about money. I didn't think about inheritance. I just thought about losing my dad. I showed up because I cared, because family is supposed to mean something. I should have known better. That day was the moment everything snapped. The moment years of quiet hurt turned into something sharp. They made their choice. They showed me where I stood. And my mom's cold message sealed it. That was the last day I held onto the idea that love and loyalty always go hand in hand. Sometimes, you aren't family. You're just convenient until you aren't needed anymore. And I was done being useful. I remember being 16 when everything finally felt obvious. Colby came home from school one afternoon to find a shiny used truck sitting in the driveway. A big red bow on the hood. Our dad standing there proud, Mom beaming like she'd been waiting her whole life for that moment. Colby hugged them like he hadn't already known they were planning it. Like he didn't hear them whispering and laughing about the surprise for weeks. I stood there with my backpack still on my shoulders, frozen. Nobody looked at me. Nobody explained. I just smiled because that's what I did. Smiled and clapped and pretended my chest didn't feel tight. And later, when I asked quietly if I might get a car someday too, they didn't even hesitate. "You can work for yours," my dad said, like it was obvious. "You're responsible. You'll handle it," my mom added, turning away. That was the logic in our house. Colby needed help. I didn't. But the truth was simpler. He was loved loudly, and I was loved silently, if at all. So I got a part-time job at a grocery store. After school, weekends, holidays. I bagged groceries while Colby drove around town showing off his truck, taking his friends to the lake, blasting music like the world belonged to him. I finally bought my car a year later, an old, faded sedan that rattled when it started. No bow. No pictures. Just me, signing papers alone. School wasn't different. I worked hard and I liked learning, so I studied late and pushed myself. I brought home straight A's and honor certificates. My parents would nod, maybe say good job before asking me to take the trash out or help with something. But when Colby passed his classes with CS, they threw him a dinner celebration. "He really applied himself this time," they said. "We're proud of you, sweetheart." I sat there eating quietly, wondering what pride felt like. Still, I tried. I called them when I went off to community college. I came home to help with chores, to visit on weekends, to show I cared. When I got my first real job at the hospital, I helped them when bills were tight, or when Dad's prescriptions got expensive. They never asked Colby. They never had to. He was always the one being helped, not the one helping. But after a few years, the house didn't feel like home anymore. I was tired of feeling like a guest in my own family. So at 20, I packed my things and moved into a tiny apartment. I told them I needed space, and they nodded like it meant nothing. I cried the first night alone, not because I was scared, but because leaving didn't break them the way it broke me. Even then, I believed I could fix it someday. I thought if I just kept trying, kept showing up, they would finally see me. But looking back, I realize I was hoping for something that was never going to exist. I wasn't leaving a home, I was stepping away from a wound and calling it hope. When my parents called and asked me to come by one Saturday morning, I didn't think much about it. My dad said he wanted to talk about some family matters, and I assumed it was about his health or maybe something to do with the house. I was tired from a long week at the hospital, but I drove over anyway, hoping it would be a normal visit for once. When I walked in, the living room was strangely quiet. Colby was already there, leaning back in a chair like he owned the place. And sitting across from him was a man in a grey suit, a folder on his lap, pen in hand. My stomach dropped a little when I realized he was a lawyer. My parents didn't greet me with hugs or small talk. They just told me to sit. The lawyer cleared his throat and started talking about estate planning and future arrangements. It felt cold, like business. I sat stiffly, hands in my lap, heart beating faster. Then he opened his folder and explained how everything would be set up: the house, the life insurance, the retirement accounts, and the lake cabin. All of it. Every asset. And then he said it, everything would go to Colby. I blinked, thinking maybe I misheard. My parents sat there nodding, calm, like they were discussing what to have for dinner. I waited for some explanation, but none came. Finally, I asked, as gently as I could, "Why am I not included?" No one looked ashamed. My mom smoothed her shirt and said, "Colby needs it more than you do." My dad added, "You're independent. You'll be fine." Like it was logical. Like it made sense. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. It wasn't about money, it was the message behind it. They were planning their future, their legacy, and I wasn't part of it. I sat there staring at my hands, trying to hold myself together. I didn't want to break down in front of them. I didn't want to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing how deeply it hurt. Colby didn't say anything. He didn't look proud or ashamed. He just sat there like this was normal, like it was deserved. I felt like I was shrinking inside my chair, like the room was closing in. They were planning for a world without them, and in that world, I didn't exist. I nodded because I didn't know what else to do. My voice was too tight to speak. I stood up slowly, thanked the lawyer out of habit, and walked toward the door. My mom called after me, something about staying for lunch, but her voice felt far away. I didn't look back. I got into my car, closed the door, and sat in silence. My chest felt heavy, like someone had put a stone there. I tried to swallow the tears, but one slipped out anyway. I wiped it quickly. I didn't want to fall apart in their driveway. I started the engine and drove away, gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. That day, something inside me cracked. Not loudly, not with anger, but quietly, like a bridge giving way under years of weight. I had always hoped things would change. But sitting there, I understood something painful and clear. I was never going to be chosen. And that truth hurt more than anything money could ever buy. When I got home that day, the silence in my apartment felt heavier than usual. I sat on my couch still wearing my coat, replaying every second of that meeting. The lawyer's voice. My parents' calm faces. That matter-of-fact tone, like I was a stranger they owed nothing to. I kept thinking there had to be a mistake, something I misunderstood. I wasn't asking for everything, or even half. I just wanted to feel like I mattered. Like I existed in their future. After hours of pacing and wiping at tears that kept coming back no matter how hard I tried to stop them, I finally picked up my phone. My hands were shaking. I typed slowly, trying to be respectful, trying not to sound angry. I told them I was hurt. I asked why there wasn't at least some portion for me. I reminded them that I had always been there, always helped, always tried. I wrote that I didn't understand and I just wanted to talk about it. I read it 3 times before sending it. I wanted to believe there was still kindness somewhere in them. That they'd respond like parents, not like judges. I watched the screen for a long time. Minutes passed, then an hour. I was afraid to put the phone down, afraid to see what they'd say, and afraid they would say nothing. When it finally buzzed, I exhaled a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. For a moment, I let myself hope. It was my mother. 2 words. "We're done." No explanation. No softness. No request to talk. Just finality, delivered in cold text like a bill reminder. I stared at those words until they blurred. My chest tightened and a sob escaped before I could stop it. I dropped the phone on the couch as if it burned my hand. I sank onto the floor, knees pulled up, and cried harder than I ever had in my life. Not loud, just broken. The kind of crying that leaves you empty, like something important was ripped out. I cried for little me who always tried. For teenage me who worked while my brother got gifts. For adult me who still believed maybe, somehow, I could earn a place in my own family if I worked hard enough. I cried until my throat hurt and my face felt sore. At some point in the night, the tears stopped. I sat there in the dark, feeling hollow but strangely clear. If they could cut me off so easily, then I had never been loved for who I was, only for what I didn't ask for how little space I took, for how quietly I tried to please them. Their love wasn't real. It was a transaction, and I had nothing left they wanted. Something in me shifted. Not anger, not yet, but a quiet certainty. I wasn't going to chase them anymore. I wasn't going to beg to be seen. I wiped my face, stood up slowly, and turned off my phone. For the first time in my life, I let myself imagine a world where I didn't need their approval to breathe. And in that moment, between the sadness and the numbness, a small seed of resolve took root. If they were done, then so was I. After that night, everything changed quietly. There was no dramatic announcement, no argument. I just stopped reaching out. I didn't call on Sundays. I didn't text to check in. I didn't drive over on my days off. I let the space grow, and with each passing week, I realized how much of my life had been spent trying to win a contest that was never meant for me. It hurt at first. Every silence felt like a bruise. But slowly, silence began to feel peaceful instead of painful. I decided to start therapy. It wasn't easy walking into that room the first time. I felt embarrassed, like I had failed somehow. But my therapist listened to me in a way no one had before. She didn't tell me I was too sensitive. She didn't say they did their best. She looked at me and said, "You deserved love without earning it." Hearing that made something inside me loosen, like I could finally breathe. Week by week, I started to understand my worth wasn't measured by how much I endured. And life kept moving. One afternoon at a coffee shop, I met someone. His name was Dean Marston. He was calm in a way that made other people feel safe. He worked in IT, talked about simple joys, cooking, hiking, repairing old radios. There was nothing dramatic about him, no ego, no need to impress. We talked like we'd known each other for years. When he asked me out, I hesitated, afraid I didn't know how to let someone treat me gently. But he waited, patient and steady, and eventually I said yes. Dating him felt different. He didn't expect me to chase approval. He checked in when I worked long shifts. He showed up with soup when I was sick. He listened when I talked about my family, and he didn't tell me to fix it. He told me I deserved peace. For the first time, I wasn't giving everything and receiving nothing. I was building something real, slow and honest. News about my parents still reached me through distant relatives. Colby was still drifting, still spending, still leaning on them like a child who never grew up. My parents complained to anyone who would listen that I had changed, that I abandoned them after all they did for me. They called me ungrateful, selfish. A daughter who turned her back on her family. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I let people think what they wanted. When my parents tried to call once, I didn't answer. I sent a short message later. "I hope you're well. I need space. Please respect that." They didn't like it. They wanted the old version of me, the girl who apologized for breathing wrong, who came running even when they pushed her away. But I wasn't her anymore. For the first time in my life, I chose myself. I wasn't angry, not yet, but I was steady. And every boundary I set felt like stitching up a part of me I didn't realize had been bleeding for years. It was late afternoon when my phone rang. I saw my mother's name on the screen and felt my stomach tighten. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail, but something in me hesitated. I answered, and her voice came through shaky and rushed. My father had been rushed to the hospital after a severe cardiac episode. They didn't call to share news or to ask how I was. They called because they needed me. I listened quietly, then said I was on my way. Dean offered to drive me, but I told him I'd be fine. The drive felt long and strangely calm. I didn't feel panicked the way I once would have. I felt focused, like a nurse heading to a patient, not a daughter running to her father. When I walked into the hospital, the smell of disinfectant and the sound of monitors felt more familiar than my own living room had during my childhood. My parents were in the waiting room. My mother rushed toward me, face blotchy from crying, grabbing my arm like she suddenly remembered I existed. My father was already in a room upstairs, sedated and monitored. They started talking fast, asking what the doctors meant, asking me to help speak to staff, asking what the medications were for. They didn't say thank you or we're glad you're here. They just needed answers and support, and they knew I could provide both. I listened, nodded, and did my job. I talked to the cardiologist, reviewed charts, explained things in calm, steady tones. My voice felt like it belonged to someone who wasn't hurting anymore. My mother clung to my words like they were the only thing keeping her upright. Not once did she say she was sorry for the past. Not once did she acknowledge the distance between us. It was like she expected everything to return to normal just because life scared her for a moment. Colby showed up an hour later, smelling faintly of beer, annoyed more than worried. He asked how long this was going to take and if he could leave soon because he had plans. He kept complaining, pacing, texting, sighing loudly like he was the one suffering. My mother still doted on him, rubbing his back, whispering reassurance. I watched it with a quiet numbness. It used to hurt. Now it just felt predictable. When the doctor came out again, my parents looked to me instead of him, waiting for me to translate. I did, because it was the right thing, not because they earned it. I didn't cry. I didn't lean on anyone. I stood straight, hands clasped, voice steady. I was the adult in the room, the one who didn't fall apart. At one point, my mother reached for my hand, her voice trembling as she whispered, "Thank God you're here." I didn't pull away, but I didn't squeeze her hand back. I just nodded. I wasn't there because they loved me. I was there because I knew how to take care of people, even when they never took care of me. As the night went on, I sat in the corner, calm and silent, while my mother cried and Colby complained about being hungry. I could feel them watching me sometimes, confused by the quiet distance in my eyes. They could sense something had changed, but they didn't know how to name it. They hadn't lost my presence, I still showed up. But somewhere along the way, they had lost my heart, and I think, for the first time, they started to feel the truth of that. My father recovered slowly, and after a few weeks, he was discharged. I visited once more after he came home, mostly to check if he was physically stable. When I walked in, the house felt different, not because anything had changed, but because they suddenly looked at me like I was important again. My mother hugged me at the door as if nothing had ever happened between us. My father smiled at me with a softness I hadn't seen in years. They offered me coffee, asked about my job, even asked about Dean. It felt strange, like stepping into a play where I didn't know my lines. Part of me wanted to believe they finally realized how much I mattered. But another part of me, the part that had been learning to protect itself, stayed quiet and still, watching. At one point, my mother sat beside me and placed her hand over mine. "Family sticks together," she said gently. "We went through a lot. We have to lean on each other." My father nodded and added, "You'll regret pulling away. Life is short. This is your family." Their voices sounded sweet, but their timing told the truth. They needed comfort. They needed stability. They needed someone who understood medical terms and responsibility. They didn't miss me. They missed what I did for them. I listened, letting the words settle. Then I asked softly, "Did you ever think about changing the will?" The room tightened instantly. My mother's hand froze. My father shifted uncomfortably. They exchanged a look, and I already knew what was coming. "We made our decision," my father said. His voice had that firm tone he used when he didn't want questions. My mother sighed and gave a weak smile. "It's tradition," she said. "Sons carry the family forward. But you're strong. You'll build your own life." There it was again. That same reasoning, dressed up in different words. It didn't matter how much I showed up, how hard I worked, how steady I had always been. Their minds had never included me in the future. I wasn't the legacy. I was the helper, the backup, the quiet one they assumed didn't need anything. I sat very still. It didn't hurt the way it used to. It felt like a truth settling into place. A truth I had been fighting for too long. I nodded slowly, not trusting my voice at first. "I understand," I finally said. And I did, not the logic, because there was none, but the reality. My mother tried to slip back into warmth again, talking about Sunday dinners and getting close again. My father mentioned holidays, suggested we spend more time together, like a real family. But their words slid off me. They weren't rebuilding a bond. They were reaching for convenience, security, comfort. They didn't fear losing me. They feared losing what I provided. When I left that day, I didn't cry in my car like before. I didn't feel broken. I felt calm, almost quiet inside. I had always been on the outside of their love. I just finally stopped pretending I wasn't. I walked away knowing they hadn't changed, and they never would. And for the first time, that realization didn't crush me. It freed me. Life moved forward in a quiet, steady way. Dean and I found a small house on the edge of town, nothing fancy, but warm and peaceful. There was a little yard, a porch big enough for 2 chairs, and sunlight that filled the kitchen every morning. When we signed the papers, I felt something shift inside me. For the first time, I wasn't building a life hoping someone would approve of it. I was building it because I deserved it. Because I wanted it. Dean hung pictures, fixed tiny things that didn't really need fixing, and brought home plants he said would make the place feel happy. I would come home from long shifts to the smell of dinner and his quiet smile, and it felt like safety, the kind I never had growing up. There was no competition, no begging to be seen. Just 2 people choosing each other every day. Meanwhile, the world I had left behind began to fall apart. I didn't hear everything at once. News came in pieces through relatives and small-town whispers. Colby had started gambling heavily. Then came the late-night speeding ticket, the missed loan payments, and eventually, a DUI. Instead of learning from consequences, he begged my parents for help, like he always did. And they gave it, like they always did. They poured savings into cleaning up his messes, believing every promise he made. Money disappeared faster than they expected. Bills piled up. Their retirement fund shrank. The mortgage payments fell behind. Soon, the house they had always bragged about, the symbol of their pride, was on the edge of foreclosure. And finally, one afternoon, my phone rang. I recognized my mother's voice the second I answered. The panic was sharp and trembling. She talked fast, explaining how things unexpectedly got difficult and how family pulls together in times like this. My father got on the phone too, voice strained, asking if I could help just until things stabilize. They talked about duty, loyalty, responsibility, words they never used when I needed even a drop of emotional support. They expected me to fix everything. They expected the daughter who always carried weight to come running again. Not because they regretted their choices, but because their favorite had finally cost them more than they could handle. I listened quietly, the phone pressed to my ear, my other hand resting on my kitchen counter. There was no anger in me, no urge to shout or cry. Just a tired understanding. I had spent years bleeding for love. I wasn't going to bleed for guilt too. "I'm sorry you're struggling," I said softly. "But I can't help with this." There was silence, then disbelief, then rising frustration. My mother's voice cracked with accusation. "How could you turn your back on us? After everything we did for you?" But I didn't flinch. I didn't absorb her panic as my fault. I simply repeated myself, calm and steady. "I hope things work out. But I need to take care of my life now." I didn't hang up angrily. I just ended the call when there was nothing more to say. Afterward, I stood in the kitchen for a long moment, feeling my heartbeat settle. This wasn't revenge. I didn't want them to suffer. I just finally chose myself. Dean walked over and wrapped his arms around me without asking questions. I leaned into him, breathing slowly. My parents' world was cracking, and they had turned to me expecting the same daughter who once begged for scraps of affection. But I wasn't that girl anymore. I wasn't their safety net. I was building my own life, one they never thought I deserved, and one I no longer needed their permission to have. The fallout came quickly after that phone call. My parents tried reaching out again, this time not with fear, but with anger sharp enough to cut. My mother called first, her voice shaking, not from sadness, but fury. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't ask if I had time to talk. She went straight to accusing. "You're abandoning your family," she snapped. "When things get hard, you just walk away. What kind of daughter does that?" I listened without interrupting. In the past, I would have rushed to defend myself, to explain, to prove I was still good. But I stood still in my kitchen, phone held loosely, letting her words pass through me like wind through an open door. My father took the phone next. His tone was flat and disappointed, the same tone he used when I was little and didn't clean the kitchen perfectly. "You should be ashamed. We raised you." That sentence hit the air like a slap, but something inside me stayed steady. I took a slow breath and answered quietly. "You didn't raise me. You raised a son. I raised myself." There was silence, heavy, stunned, choking. My mother sputtered, angry and shocked, but I didn't wait for more. I told them I needed space and hung up before the guilt could creep in. The quiet after the call didn't feel cold anymore. It felt like breathing after being underwater too long. After that, things unraveled for them faster than anyone expected. Colby couldn't keep up with his debts, and the lake cabin, the place they always bragged about, the one I never had a key to, went first. Sold off to cover one of his disasters. Then came the house. The one where I spent my childhood trying to earn love in every hallway and corner. They couldn't save it. Years of pouring money into their son's mistakes finally swallowed them whole. They moved into a small rental across town, a basic, cramped place with peeling paint and a tiny yard. I drove by once on my way to work, just to see. There was no satisfaction, only a quiet sadness. Life had humbled them in a way I never wanted to. I never wished them pain. I just stopped offering myself as their shield. People in town talked, of course. Whispering in grocery aisles, outside church doors, over backyard fences. Small towns always talk when big houses get sold and shiny dreams fade. But no one blamed me, because the truth was visible. Colby stumbled through town like a man who never learned to stand on his own feet, bitter and red-eyed, still blaming everyone but himself. And my parents followed him like shadows clinging to a failing light. I didn't defend myself to anyone. I didn't explain what happened or try to clear my name. I didn't need to. Sometimes truth speaks louder when you stay silent. I went to work, came home to Dean, watered my plants, and kept building a quiet, steady life. The world they built around my brother had crumbled, not because I pushed it, but because it was never strong to begin with. And for the first time, I realized I didn't have to feel guilty for walking away from a fire I didn't start. They chose who to hold up. They chose who to leave behind. Now they were living with those choices, and I was living with mine. Years passed, and the distance between us became a quiet, steady border. I didn't hate them, I just didn't go back. My life moved forward in a way I once thought only other people got to experience. Dean and I married in a small ceremony under oak trees, the kind where people cry because it feels pure, not because something is missing. We bought a little house that smelled like sawdust and fresh paint, and we filled it with warmth, not because it was big or impressive, but because we built it together. Therapy helped me unlearn old pain. I stopped expecting love to hurt. I stopped believing I had to earn my place in someone's life. When we found out we were expecting a baby, I cried in a way I never had before, not from sadness, but hope. I kept imagining a tiny life that would grow up never wondering why they weren't enough. That was my real revenge, breaking the cycle. My parents grew older. Life was not kind to them in their later years. They tried reaching out again, the tone softer this time, the edges worn down by exhaustion. They asked how I was. They asked about my work. They even sent a card when they heard about the pregnancy. But when the subject of the will came up again, nothing had changed. They still held on to their tradition, still saving everything for Colby as if time hadn't proven how fragile that decision was. They wanted a relationship without responsibility for the harm. They wanted comfort without repair. And I couldn't give that. So I stayed firm but gentle. I told them I wished them peace, that I hoped life still held good things for them. But I would not come back to be a supporting wall for a structure that never held me. Colby didn't change either. He slid in and out of trouble like it was a rhythm he couldn't break. My parents clung to him still, the way people cling to a sinking ship they convinced themselves was unsinkable. And I let them. It wasn't my burden anymore. Sometimes, I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who sat in her room hoping her parents might knock on the door just to check on her. Now, I was decorating a nursery and laughing at Dean singing off-key while he assembled a crib. Every part of my life felt earned, real, and free. One quiet evening, I sat in the rocking chair in the baby's room, soft sunlight spilling across the carpet, and I realized something profound. I didn't lose a family. I simply stepped away from people who never chose me. And instead of wasting years waiting for an apology they would never give, I built something better. Some people think revenge is loud, angry, explosive. But mine was soft. It was peace. It was a home filled with love instead of competition. It was knowing that my child would never feel like the extra one. Sometimes, the best revenge is not proving them wrong. It's living a life where their wrongness doesn't matter anymore. And I did. I truly did.